First Kings chapter 17. So God had a prophet named Elijah who he sent out with a message to King Ahab of Israel. God was going to dry up the land of Israel by preventing it from raining, and this was a judgment on the whole nation for their wickedness. After this, God told Elijah to go east of Jordan to the Cherith brook, and God would provide for him there. At the brook, God cared for Elijah by causing the ravens to bring him food every morning and evening. And when the brook dried up, God told Elijah to go to Zarephath, where he would meet a widow who would take care of him. When he arrived at Zarephath's gate, he found a widow and asked her to bring him some water and some bread. The woman told him that she only had a tiny portion of flour and oil left, and that she was planning to cook one last meal for her and her son before they died. Elijah told her to use the flour to make him some bread first, and he promised her that if she would do it, that her jar of flour would never be empty and her jug of oil would never run dry. She did as the prophet instructed, and Elijah's word came true. God filled her jar of flour and jug of oil every day until the rain returned to Israel. One day, the widow's son became very sick and died. So Elijah took the boy, carried him to the upper part of the house, and laid him on his bed. He stretched himself over the body 3 times and called out to God to raise him from the dead. God acknowledged Elijah's plea and raised the boy. And when his mother saw him alive, she said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is true." This chapter is really interesting because, first of all, Elijah doesn't really get an introduction. He's straight away seen talking to King Ahab and doing the work of God. Another thing is that there's nothing really traditional about the way that God provided for his prophet. First, he had birds that were considered unclean bring his prophet food. Then he sent his prophet to a woman who was too poor even to feed herself, and proceed to feed them both using a supernatural jar of never-ending flour and oil. Now, what we can learn from this chapter is that if you ever find yourself in a tight spot and you can't see any traditional way out of your predicament, think back to stories like this one and remember that God works in mysterious ways. He has more ways than you can ever even imagine to get you the things that you need. So have faith like the poor widow who fed Elijah before herself, trusting that God's word would come true. God bless you. 1 Kings chapter 18. So God spoke to Elijah in the 3rd year of the drought and told him to find King Ahab. On his way, he met Obadiah, a righteous man who oversaw Ahab's house. Now Obadiah had hidden 100 prophets of God in caves when Jezebel, Ahab's wife, tried to kill them and provided them with food and water. So Elijah told Obadiah to tell Ahab that he was there, and Obadiah was initially hesitant because Ahab had been hunting Elijah and he was worried that the Spirit of the Lord would take Elijah away and Ahab would strike him down for lying. But eventually he did as Elijah asked. When the prophet met the king, Ahab accused Elijah of being a troubler of Israel, and Elijah told Ahab that he was the real troubler of the nation because he had abandoned God's commandments. Then Elijah told Ahab to gather the people of Israel, the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah, and meet him at Mount Carmel. Elijah said to the people, "How long will you go limping between 2 different opinions?" And he demanded a choice from the people, to serve God or to serve idols, but that they couldn't choose both. When the people failed to respond, Elijah challenged the prophet of Baal to a test. So Elijah and the prophets of Baal would each build an altar and put a bull on it for a sacrifice. Then they would cry out to their respective gods, and the God who answered with fire from heaven would be shown to be the one true God. The prophets of Baal went first, and they cried out to Baal from morning until noon, but nothing happened. Elijah then began mocking them, saying that they should shout louder because he might be daydreaming or using the bathroom or away on a trip or asleep. And the prophets started shouting louder, hitting themselves with swords and machetes until they bled, and they raved all afternoon until evening, but there was no answer. Then it was Elijah's turn, and for good measure he asked for 12 jars of water to be poured on the wood of his altar, and he made a trench around it. Elijah then prayed to God, and God answered his prayer. Fire fell from heaven and consumed the bull, the wood, the stones, the dust, and even the remaining water in the trench. And when people saw it, they fell on their faces and worshipped the true God of heaven. And Elijah had all 450 of the prophets of Baal slaughtered. Then, on top of Mount Carmel, Elijah prayed for rain, and he had his servant check 7 times for rain. And after the 7th time, Elijah's servant spotted a small cloud about the size of a man's hand rising up from the sea. And Elijah commanded Ahab to return to Jezreel on his chariot before the rain came. And sure enough, the sky became dark and heavy rain fell on Israel. The hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he outran Ahab's chariot to the city of Jezreel. Now, it's a common tactic for wicked people to blame the followers of God for their problems in the culture, pretending that everything would be better if Christians would try to stop imposing their God's laws on everyone, when in reality it's the wicked and the godless people who ruin cultures. It's self-created morality and proud self-governance that make places unlivable. Ahab accused Elijah of bringing problems to Israel when in fact it was his own behaviour that had dried up the nation and caused a famine. Christian values save nations while godless nations descend into depravity. God bless you.